Elena Martinez had always taken pride in her knack for maintaining her composure, regardless of the obstacles she faced. As a financial analyst in a demanding corporate setting, she was accustomed to tackling intricate issues under stringent deadlines. However, following the passing of her spouse 2 years prior, she came to understand that life encompassed more than just reason and determination. It was also about securing tranquility for herself and her two children, Ava and Noah. Seeking serenity for herself and her children, Elena had relocated to the outskirts of the city, envisioning a fresh beginning in a serene neighborhood with a pristine home featuring a backyard pool, a dream her late husband had cherished for their family. For Elena, this wasn't merely a luxury. It was a commitment to herself to establish a safe and joyful environment for her children to flourish. Their new residence matched her dreams perfectly. A timeless two-story house adorned with white shutters, enclosed by a sturdy wooden fence that provided seclusion from the outside world. The centerpiece, naturally, was the pool, a gleaming blue rectangular expanse bordered by a flawlessly tiled patio. For her 10-year-old daughter Ava and her 8-year-old son Noah, the pool was a paradise realized. On their inaugural day, the children had plunged into the water the moment the movers departed, their laughter and splashes echoing under the afternoon sun. Elena watched nearby, sipping iced tea and smiling as she observed them enjoying themselves. This was the life her husband would have wanted for their family to thrive, even in his absence. For a fleeting moment, everything felt perfect. That illusion, however, was short-lived. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, the sound of the gate latch clicking open caught Elena's attention. She turned to see a tall, lean man in his late 50s standing at the boundary of her backyard. He was impeccably dressed in a light gray suit, his thinning silver hair neatly combed back, and his face bore a smug smile that instantly heightened Elena's defenses. Without waiting for an invitation, he proceeded onto her property with an authoritative demeanor, his polished shoes clicking against the tiled patio. "Good evening," the man declared, his voice smooth, yet tinged with condescension. "I'm Marcus Bennett, the HOA president. I wanted to personally welcome you to the neighborhood." Elena forced a courteous smile and stood to greet him. "Thank you, Mr. Bennett. I'm Elena Martinez. These are my children, Ava and Noah." Marcus barely glanced at the kids, his eyes fixed on the pool. "Ah, yes, beautiful property you have here. And this pool, stunning. Did the previous owner leave it in this state, or did you renovate it?" "It was part of the house when we purchased it," Elena responded cautiously, uneasy with the way he scrutinized the pool as if it were a problem to be fixed. "Well, I hope you're aware of the regulations," Marcus replied, his tone becoming more severe. "Pools are a significant liability in our community. We have strict rules to ensure safety and compliance. I trust you've reviewed the HOA guidelines." "I skimmed through them," Elena admitted, striving to maintain a neutral tone. "But the pool is on private property, so I assumed it was exempt." Marcus interrupted her with a practiced wave of his hand. "Private property or not, the HOA has jurisdiction over anything that might affect the community. For instance, I noticed your children were in the pool unsupervised." "That violates Section 7.3 of the HOA regulations. All children under 16 must be accompanied by an HOA-certified safety monitor." Elena blinked, her polite smile wavering. "Excuse me? This is my pool. I was right here watching them." "I understand your concern," Marcus said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "But rules are rules. If an accident were to occur, the HOA could be held liable, and that's a risk we're not willing to take. For your safety and others, I must insist that the pool remain off limits until you hire an approved monitor or attend one of our safety certification courses." Elena stared at him, disbelief and anger simmering beneath her calm facade. "I'm perfectly capable of supervising my own children, thank you." Marcus's smile broadened, though it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm sure you believe that, Miss Martinez. However, the rules exist for a reason. I'd hate to see you face penalties for noncompliance. Consider this a friendly warning." With that, he turned and walked out of the yard, leaving Elena standing there, stunned. She glanced at her children, who had emerged from the pool, now wrapped in towels, their faces showing confusion and a hint of fear. What should have been an idyllic day was tainted by a man whose arrogance and authority seemed boundless. That night, Elena retrieved the HOA's welcome packet and meticulously reviewed every regulation. Section 7.3 was precisely as Marcus had described, but the language was ambiguous enough to allow for interpretation. Nonetheless, it was evident that the HOA viewed the pool as a liability, and Marcus was intent on enforcing their rules rigorously. A sense of defiance welled up within her. This was her home, her sanctuary, and she wasn't going to let a self-important HOA president dictate how she raised her children. The following morning, after sending Ava and Noah to school, Elena spent the day contacting her real estate agent and a few neighbors to gain a better understanding of the situation. What she discovered was both enlightening and infuriating. Marcus Bennett had served as HOA president for over a decade, during which he had built a reputation as a control enthusiast. He was notorious for imposing fines for minor infractions, from slightly overgrown lawns to mailboxes painted in the incorrect shade of beige. More concerning were reports of him targeting specific homeowners, pressuring them to sell or compelling them to comply with increasingly unreasonable demands. Elena realized this wasn't merely about the pool. Marcus was testing her, gauging how far he could push before she resisted. But Elena wasn't one to back down easily. This was her home, and she refused to let anyone, Marcus, the HOA, or anyone else who thought they could intimidate her, take that away from her. What she didn't know was that Marcus Bennett never played fair, and this was only the beginning. Elena awoke the next morning with an unsettling feeling. She couldn't shake the memory of Marcus standing in her yard, his smug expression as he recited HOA regulations like a courtroom attorney. It wasn't just his demeanor or presence that disturbed her. It was the clear message behind his words. She wasn't in control here. Marcus and, by extension, the HOA, saw her as an outsider who needed to be educated on how their community operated. But Elena wasn't the type to comply without a fight, especially when it concerned her family's happiness. Her day began uneventfully. After dropping Ava and Noah off at school, she brewed a cup of coffee and sat by the pool, gazing at the calm water as she tried to process the morning's events. The previous night, she had read the HOA handbook thoroughly, highlighting every section related to pools. While the rules were undoubtedly strict, there was nothing that explicitly granted the HOA the authority to prohibit her children from using their own pool. Section 7.3 mentioned safety monitors but didn't mandate them for private property. The more Elena pondered, the angrier she became. Marcus had intentionally misrepresented the rules, relying on her lack of knowledge to advance his agenda. But why? What did he gain by targeting her? Her thoughts were interrupted by the arrival of mail. Expecting the usual bills and advertisements, she instead found a letter bearing the HOA's logo. She tore it open and read the contents, her irritation quickly turning to rage. The letter was an official warning, stating that her pool was now classified as a potential safety hazard and required immediate inspection by an HOA-approved contractor. Until the inspection was completed, the pool was to remain unused. Failure to comply would result in daily fines of $100. The letter was, unsurprisingly, signed by Marcus Bennett. Elena stormed into the house, clutching the letter in one hand and grabbing her phone with the other. She dialed the number at the bottom of the letter, her heart pounding with frustration. After several rings, a cheerful but automated voice answered. Homeowners Association office. This is Linda speaking. How can I help you today? This is Elena Martinez. I received a letter this morning about my pool being classified as a safety hazard. I'd like to speak to whoever is responsible for this. Ah, yes, Miss Martinez, Linda replied, her tone slightly condescending. I see your file here. That would be Mr. Bennett. Unfortunately, he's in meetings all day, but I'd be happy to assist you. I don't think you can, Elena snapped. This letter is absurd. My pool is on private property and poses no danger to anyone. I'd like to know on what basis this classification was made. Linda's voice grew slightly sharper. As per our guidelines, Any pool deemed a potential risk to the community can be subject to review. Mr. Bennett himself inspected your property yesterday and made the determination. Elena felt her blood boil. Inspected? He didn't inspect anything. He barged into my yard uninvited and fabricated rules that don't apply to my property. This is harassment. I'm sorry you feel that way, Miss Martinez, Linda responded coldly. But Mr. Bennett's decisions are final. If you'd like to dispute the classification, you'll need to submit an appeal in writing. Otherwise, the inspection must take place within 7 days, or fines will begin accruing. Elena clenched her jaw, forcing herself to take a deep breath. Fine, she said curtly. I'll submit an appeal, but let me be clear, I'm not going to let this go. Have a nice day, Linda replied with feigned cheerfulness before hanging up. Elena spent the rest of the day drafting her appeal, meticulously citing the HOA handbook and highlighting the flaws in Marcus's claims. She dropped the letter off at the HOA office that afternoon, feeling a slight sense of accomplishment as she handed it to Linda, who accepted it with a forced smile. However, her triumph was fleeting. Upon returning home, she discovered a bright yellow sign affixed to her front gate. It read, Elena Martinez, pool classified as safety hazard. No use until inspection. Elena tore the sign off the gate, crumpling it in her hand as she stormed inside. She was seething with frustration but refused to let Marcus prevail. She contacted a local contractor and scheduled a private pool inspection, determined to demonstrate that her pool was entirely safe. Over the next few days, she monitored her property closely, wary of further interference from the HOA. The contractor arrived punctually and conducted a thorough examination, confirming what Elena already knew. The pool was in excellent condition and posed no safety risks. Armed with the report, she sent a copy to the HOA, accompanied by a strongly worded letter demanding the immediate removal of the classification. But Marcus wasn't finished. A few days later, Elena awoke to find her pool filled with muddy water. Initially, she thought it was an accident. Perhaps a storm had blown debris into the pool overnight. However, as she approached the water's edge, she noticed something unusual. The mud wasn't just on the surface. It was thick and clumpy, as if someone had deliberately dumped dirt into the pool. Her heart sank when she saw tire tracks leading away from her backyard gate. Someone had done this intentionally. Elena immediately reviewed the footage from her newly installed security cameras, hoping to identify the culprits. To her dismay, the cameras had been tampered with. The video feed showed nothing but static from midnight to dawn. Whoever had sabotaged her pool had come prepared. She called the police to report the incident, but the officer who arrived seemed indifferent. It's probably just some neighborhood kids messing around, he said with a shrug. There's not much we can do without evidence. It's not kids, Elena insisted. This is targeted harassment. I know the HOA is behind this. The officer gave her a skeptical look. Do you have proof of that? Elena hesitated. Without the camera footage, she had nothing concrete to link the incident to Marcus or the HOA. Frustrated, she thanked the officer and sent him on his way. Standing by the ruined pool, staring at the muddy water, Elena felt a newfound resolve take hold. This wasn't just about the pool anymore. It was about standing up to those who believed they could bully her into submission. If Marcus wanted a fight, she was prepared to give him one. The muddy pool felt like a direct challenge. Elena stood at the edge of the pool, fists clenched, her anger simmering beneath a calm exterior. She had spent the past week trying to adhere to the rules, drafting appeals, sending reports, and attempting to reason with people who clearly weren't interested in logic or fairness. But this was personal. The pool was the heart of her new home, a symbol of everything she had worked for and everything she wanted to protect for her children. Someone, likely Marcus Bennett, had gone out of their way to defile it. Elena didn't have time to dwell in frustration. She needed action. By mid-morning, she had hired a pool cleaning service, a small local company run by a man named Frank, who arrived with his crew just hours after her call. As Frank inspected the damage, his expression grew increasingly serious. Whoever did this wasn't messing around, he said, gesturing to the sludge-filled water. "This isn't just dirt. They dumped a mix of clay, debris, and what looks like cement powder. That stuff will clog your filters and ruin the pool lining if we don't act quickly." "Can you fix it?" Elena asked, already bracing for the worst. "It'll take a few days and cost more than usual," Frank admitted. "But yes, we can get it cleaned up." "Do it," Elena said firmly. She refused to let this setback intimidate her. As the crew got to work, she stepped inside to make a few more calls. First, she contacted her lawyer, Laura Stevens, to report the vandalism and discuss her next steps. Laura, a no-nonsense attorney with years of experience handling HOA disputes, listened patiently as Elena recounted what had happened. "This isn't just harassment," Laura said after a long pause. "It's destruction of property. If we can prove it was the HOA or someone acting on their behalf, we could have grounds for a lawsuit." "Do you have any evidence?" Elena asked. "The security cameras were tampered with," Elena admitted, frustration evident in her voice. "But there are tire tracks near the gate. Maybe we can match them to a vehicle." "It's a start," Laura replied. "I'll send someone to document the scene. In the meantime, keep documenting everything: letters, emails, even phone calls with the HOA. The more we have, the stronger our case will be." Elena hung up and immediately began sifting through the HOA's regulations and recent communications. She noticed a pattern every time Marcus had contacted her: imposing arbitrary restrictions, levying fines, or escalating the situation further. It wasn't just about safety or rules, it was about control. Marcus wanted her to feel powerless, forcing her into compliance through sheer exhaustion. By evening, Frank's crew had made significant progress, draining the pool and removing most of the sludge. But as Elena walked out to thank them, she noticed something that halted her in her tracks: a bright yellow flyer taped to her front door. It read, "Notice of non-compliance. Failure to schedule HOA inspection." The flyer detailed new penalties, including daily fines and the potential for legal action if she didn't allow an HOA-approved contractor to assess the pool. The compliance deadline was set for the following morning, just 12 hours away. Elena's first instinct was to tear the flyer to shreds, but she restrained herself, knowing this was exactly what Marcus wanted: to push her to react emotionally. Instead, she took a picture of the notice and sent it to Laura with a brief message. "New tactic. Need advice." Laura called back almost immediately. "This is ridiculous. They can't impose a new deadline with less than 24 hours notice. It's a clear overreach. They're escalating," Melanie said, pacing the length of her kitchen. "First the mud, now this. It feels like they're trying to overwhelm me." "That's exactly what they're doing," Laura agreed. "But they're also making mistakes. Every unreasonable demand, every unexplained action, it all builds your case. Let them dig their own hole. Just document everything." Elena decided to follow Laura's advice, though her patience was wearing thin. She was tired of feeling targeted, tired of wondering what the HOA would throw at her next. That night, she stayed up late reviewing the security footage from before the cameras had been tampered with. There was nothing incriminating, but she noticed something odd. A black SUV had driven past her house multiple times the night before the vandalism. The vehicle never stopped, but its behavior was suspicious enough to warrant attention. The next morning, as the HOA contractor arrived at her gate, Elena was waiting with her phone in hand, ready to record everything. The contractor, a middle-aged man with a clipboard and a surly attitude, barely acknowledged her as he walked into the backyard. He spent less than 5 minutes inspecting the pool, most of which had already been cleaned, and declared it in violation of HOA standards. When Elena pressed him for specifics, he simply shrugged and muttered something about structural risks. "This is ridiculous," Elena said, filming him as he hurriedly filled out his report. "You didn't even check the pool equipment. How can you call this a proper inspection?" "I'm just doing my job," the man replied, avoiding eye contact. "If you have an issue, take it up with the HOA." He handed her a copy of his report, filled with vague language and unsubstantiated claims, and left without another word. Elena immediately emailed a copy to Laura, who responded with a single word: laughable. But Elena wasn't laughing. Later that afternoon, as she returned from picking up Ava and Noah from school, she found another surprise waiting for her. A chain-link fence erected around her pool, complete with a padlock and a large sign that read, "Unsafe area, do not enter." She stood there in stunned silence, her children watching on with confusion and fear. Ava clutched her hand and asked, "Mom, why are they doing this to us?" Elena didn't have an answer. All she could do was hug her daughter tightly and assure her that everything would be all right. But deep down, Elena knew this was a turning point. The HOA had crossed a line, and it was time to fight back. That evening, with the children asleep upstairs, Elena sat at her kitchen table surrounded by documents, photos, and notes. She drafted a letter to the HOA demanding the immediate removal of the fence and detailing their ongoing harassment. She also contacted Frank, asking if his crew could return to finish the cleanup once the fence was removed. But Elena wasn't merely planning to react. She was preparing to take the offensive. If Marcus Bennett thought he could intimidate her into submission, he was about to learn just how wrong he was. Her resolve strengthened as the chain-link fence around her pool stood as a tangible reminder of the lengths the HOA, and Marcus Bennett in particular, were willing to go to assert their dominance. The fence wasn't just a barrier. It was a provocation, a declaration of war on her home and her family. As she stared at the padlock glinting in the morning sunlight, Elena realized that defending passively wasn't enough anymore. If she didn't take control of the situation, Marcus would only escalate further. It was time to dig deeper and push back harder. Her first call that morning was to Laura Stevens. "I need your help," Elena said, outlining the latest developments. "This fence is illegal. They have no authority to physically alter or block access to my property. This is textbook harassment." "How do we get it taken down?" Elena asked, pacing her kitchen. "I can't let my kids keep seeing this every day. It's making them scared in their own home." Laura paused. "We need to file an injunction to force its removal, but that'll take time. Meanwhile, gather as much evidence as possible to show how absurd their claims are. If we can disprove their justification for the fence, it'll strengthen our case." Elena nodded, her mind already racing with plans. As she ended the call, her phone buzzed with an email notification. It was from Frank, the pool contractor. He had sent her the final report on the pool's condition after the cleanup. The findings were exactly what Elena had expected. The pool was structurally sound, the equipment was in perfect working order, and the so-called safety hazards were non-existent. This report, combined with the HOA contractor's laughably vague inspection, provided her with a solid foundation to challenge Marcus's actions. But she wasn't stopping there. Over the next few days, Elena shifted into full investigator mode. She began researching the history of the HOA and its leadership, starting with Marcus himself. It didn't take long to uncover troubling patterns. Marcus had been involved in multiple disputes with homeowners over the years, often targeting those who resisted his authority. In at least 2 documented cases, homeowners had been pressured into selling their properties after facing relentless fines and restrictions. Both properties were later sold to the same developer, Bennett Properties LLC. The name raised red flags for Elena. It couldn't be a coincidence. Digging further, she discovered that Bennett Properties had quietly acquired several parcels of land in the neighborhood over the past 5 years, all linked to disputes with the HOA. The developers seemed to specialize in flipping residential lots for commercial purposes, often converting them into multi-unit housing complexes or upscale rentals. Elena couldn't prove it yet, but she began to suspect that Marcus was using the HOA as a weapon to clear out properties for his own financial gain, and now it seemed her home was next. Armed with this information, Elena reached out to a local private investigator, Daniel Thompson, to delve deeper into Bennett Properties and its connection to the HOA. Daniel, a seasoned ex-cop with a reputation for thoroughness, agreed to take the case. "I've seen these kinds of power plays before," he said during their first meeting. "If the HOA boards can be ruthless when money is involved. I'll see what I can find." While Daniel pursued his leads, Elena continued her own efforts to fight back. She contacted her neighbors, hoping to find allies among them. To her surprise, a few were more sympathetic than she had expected. An elderly woman, Mrs. Thompson, revealed that Marcus had been pressuring her to replace her mailbox with one that met community standards, even though her current mailbox was perfectly functional. Another neighbor, a single father named Tom, admitted that Marcus had fined him repeatedly for unauthorized landscaping after he planted a small vegetable garden in his backyard. "These fines aren't about rules," Tom said bitterly. "They're about control. Marcus wants everyone to bend to his will. The second you push back, he makes your life hell." Elena shared her suspicions about Bennett Properties, and the neighbors listened with growing unease. While they weren't ready to take public action, the fear of retaliation loomed large, and they agreed to quietly support Elena's efforts. Mrs. Thompson even provided her with copies of HOA newsletters and meeting minutes that hinted at Marcus's close ties to the developer. One night, as Elena was poring over the documents Mrs. Thompson had given her, Daniel Thompson called with an update. "You were right about Bennett Properties," he said. "The company is registered under a shell corporation, but I traced it back to Marcus's nephew. It's a family operation. They're using the HOA to create artificial pressure on homeowners, driving down property values so they can swoop in and buy cheap." Elena's grip tightened on the phone. "So it's all a scheme. But how do we prove it?" "Let me dig a little deeper," Daniel replied. "If there's money changing hands between the HOA and the developer, there'll be a paper trail. These guys always leave something behind." As Daniel continued his investigation, Elena focused on her next immediate goal, getting the fence removed. She filed her injunction armed with Frank's contractor report and photographic evidence of the pool's clean condition, but she knew the legal process would take time, and Marcus was likely planning his next move. Sure enough, just days after filing the injunction, Elena found another HOA notice taped to her front door. This one accused her of violating noise ordinances during the pool cleanup and threatened additional fines if she continued to disturb the peace. It was the final straw. Elena stormed into the HOA office, determined to confront Marcus directly. The receptionist, Linda, looked up from her desk with a thin, professional smile that didn't reach her eyes. Miss Martinez, how can I help you today?" "I need to speak with Marcus," Elena said, her voice cold. "Mr. Bennett is in a meeting," Linda replied, her smile unwavering. "But I'd be happy to pass along a message." "I'm not leaving until I speak with him," Elena shot back. She crossed her arms, positioning herself firmly in front of the desk. Linda hesitated, then sighed. "Please, wait here." A few minutes later, Marcus emerged from the back office, his expression carefully neutral. Miss Martinez," he said, his tone dripping with false politeness. "What can I do for you?" Elena didn't waste time on pleasantries. "You've crossed every imaginable line, Marcus. The fence, the fake inspections, the vandalism. You think you can bully me into giving up my home? It's not going to work." Marcus's smile tightened. "I'm not bullying anyone, Miss Martinez. I'm simply enforcing the rules. If you feel otherwise, you're welcome to take it up with the board." "I'm taking it up with the judge," Elena retorted. "And while we're at it, I'd love to hear your explanation for Bennett Properties buying up every property you've driven into foreclosure." For the first time, Marcus's composure wavered. His jaw tightened, and a flicker of annoyance crossed his face. "I don't know what you're talking about." "You will," Elena said, turning on her heel and walking out of the office. As she left, she felt a surge of determination. The pieces were finally coming together, and she wasn't going to let Marcus or anyone else intimidate her. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time, Elena felt she had the upper hand. Elena returned home from her confrontation with Marcus, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and unease. She had rattled him, but she knew this wouldn't be the end. Marcus wasn't one to back down easily, and she had no doubt he was already planning his next move. As much as she wanted to celebrate her small victory, she also knew she had to remain vigilant. Every time she thought she had seen the extent of his pettiness, he found a way to stoop even lower. The next escalation came sooner than expected. Just 2 days later, Elena woke up to a series of sharp knocks on her door. Bleary-eyed, she opened it to find a group of HOA board members standing on her porch, clipboard in hand, and expressions of thinly veiled disdain on their faces. Marcus wasn't with them, but his presence was felt in their confident, dismissive demeanor, clearly prepared for confrontation. "Miss Martinez," began one of them, a middle-aged woman named Barbara, in a tone meant to sound professional but coming off as smug. "We're here to conduct a mandatory inspection of your property. It's been brought to our attention that there are additional violations that need to be addressed." Elena crossed her arms, blocking the doorway. "Violations? Like what?" Barbara's lips curled into a tight smile. "It's come to our attention that your backyard fencing does not meet community standards, and there are concerns about unapproved modifications to your landscaping. We need to verify that everything is in compliance." "Community standards," Elena repeated, her voice dripping with disbelief. "This fence was here when I bought the house, and I haven't touched the landscaping." Barbara said, clearly unfazed, "That's exactly what we're here to confirm. If everything checks out, there's nothing to worry about." Elena knew better than to let them roam freely on her property. "I don't consent to any inspections without prior written notice. If you have concerns, put them in writing and send them to my lawyer." The board members exchanged glances, their smug expressions faltering slightly. Barbara's smile stiffened. "Refusing an inspection could result in additional fines, Miss Martinez." Elena shot back, slamming the door before they could respond. She stood there for a moment, her heart pounding as she listened to their murmurs on the other side. Eventually, she heard their footsteps retreating, and the tension in her chest eased slightly. But she knew this wasn't over. Later that day, Elena received an email from Laura. The private investigator Daniel Thompson had uncovered a bombshell: detailed financial records showing that Bennett Properties had been purchasing properties at significantly reduced prices, with the majority of the sales occurring shortly after HOA enforcement actions. Even more damning were transactions linking the developer directly to Marcus Bennett. The evidence painted a clear picture. Marcus was weaponizing the HOA to force homeowners into selling, all for his personal gain. Laura's email ended with a simple but urgent suggestion: "We need to make this public." Elena agreed. She reached out to Tom, the single father who had expressed support for her efforts, and asked if he would help rally the neighbors. Tom, though hesitant, agreed to host a small gathering at his house that weekend, inviting homeowners who had been targeted by Marcus or the HOA. Elena spent the next few days preparing, compiling all the evidence she had gathered: Daniel's report, the photos of her vandalized pool, and the fake inspection notices. It was time to show the community what was truly happening. The meeting took place on a Saturday evening. About a dozen neighbors showed up, some curious, others clearly nervous about attending a gathering that could be seen as a direct challenge to the HOA. Elena began by sharing her own story, detailing the harassment she had endured and the length that Marcus had gone to disrupt her life. Then she presented the evidence, outlining the connections between the HOA and Bennett Properties. As she spoke, she could see the expressions of her neighbors shift from skepticism to anger to determination. When she finished, Tom stood up. "This has gone too far," he said, his voice steady but resolute. "Marcus has been using the HOA to line his own pockets, and we've all been paying the price. It's time we did something about it." The group began brainstorming ways to fight back. Some suggested petitioning for Marcus's removal as each HOA president, while others talked about filing a collective lawsuit. But Elena knew that Marcus wouldn't be toppled so easily. He was too entrenched, too confident in his ability to manipulate the system. They needed a plan that would hit him where it hurt his reputation and his wallet. The next escalation came just days later. Elena returned home from running errands to find a construction crew on her property, dismantling parts of her backyard fence. Furious, she demanded to know what they were doing, but the workers simply pointed to an official-looking document taped to her front door. It was an order from the HOA authorizing the removal of non-compliant structures. The document cited vague violations and listed Marcus Bennett as the approving authority. Elena immediately called Laura, who was equally outraged. "This is trespassing and destruction of property," Laura said. "We'll file a motion to stop this, but it's going to take time. For now, document everything." Elena spent the rest of the day photographing the damage and filming the workers as they tore down her fence. The sight of her once private backyard, now exposed to the street, filled her with a mix of anger and despair. But as she reviewed the footage later that night, she noticed something unusual. A worker was wearing a jacket with a logo she didn't recognize. It wasn't from the construction company listed on the HOA's notice. She sent the image to Daniel, hoping he could identify it. The following morning, Daniel called with an update. "The logo belongs to a subcontractor frequently used by Bennett Properties. This isn't just HOA enforcement," Daniel said. "This is a coordinated effort to make your property look undesirable. They're setting you up to sell." Elena's frustration boiled over. She was done playing defense. If Marcus wanted to push her to the brink, she was going to push back even harder. She contacted a local journalist who had covered HOA abuses in the past, providing them with all the evidence she had gathered. Within days, the story went live, exposing Marcus's corrupt dealings and the connection between the HOA and Bennett Properties. The article sparked outrage within the community, and neighbors who had once been too afraid to speak out began sharing their own experiences. But Elena knew Marcus wouldn't go down without a fight. As the backlash against him grew, so did the pressure on her. Anonymous threats appeared in her mailbox, warning her to back off. Late one night, her security cameras captured a figure in a hoodie lurking near her mailbox, but the person vanished before the police arrived. It was clear that Marcus and his allies were becoming desperate. Still, Elena refused to back down. She had come too far to let fear stop her now. With Laura and Daniel by her side, and the support of her neighbors growing stronger, she prepared for the final confrontation. Marcus had underestimated her resolve, but he was about to learn just how determined she could be. The morning of the final confrontation arrived gray and cold, mirroring the tension building in the neighborhood. Elena stood by her kitchen window, staring out at the wreckage of her once beautiful backyard. The fence had been torn down, the pool surrounded by the unsightly chain-link barrier that Marcus's crew had erected, and patches of her lawn were churned up by heavy machinery. It no longer felt like her sanctuary. It felt like a battleground. Her phone buzzed on the counter, breaking her from her thoughts. It was Laura. "Everything set, the lawyer said?" Laura asked without preamble. "We have the injunction to force the HOA to remove the fence, and I filed a civil suit for harassment and property damage." "But Elena," Laura cautioned, "be prepared. Marcus isn't going to take this lying down." "I wouldn't expect him to," Elena replied calmly, though her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the phone. "What about the financial records? The ones tying him to Bennett Properties?" "They're admissible," Laura confirmed. "But I bet he'll try to spin them as legitimate business dealings. That's why it's critical we use the testimonies from your neighbors. If we can prove a pattern of harassment and intimidation, the judge will see through his lies. Then let's make sure we hit him from every angle." As soon as she hung up, Elena checked her security cameras. Over the past week, she had upgraded her system with additional cameras and motion detectors, ensuring there were no blind spots on her property. The footage had already captured several suspicious incidents, including a worker from Marcus's crew attempting to tamper with her garage door late at night. This evidence, combined with Daniel Thompson's findings, painted a damning picture of Marcus's tactics. At exactly 10 a.m., Elena heard the rumble of engines outside. Stepping onto her front porch, she saw a convoy of vehicles pulling up, 2 unmarked trucks carrying construction equipment, followed by Marcus's sleek black SUV. He stepped out, flanked by 2 board members and a group of workers in safety vests. They moved with military precision, heading straight for the backyard as if they owned the place. Elena was ready for them. She marched down the porch steps and intercepted Marcus near the gate. "This ends now," she said, her voice sharp and unwavering. Marcus gave her a patronizing smile, the kind that had infuriated her since their first meeting. Miss Martinez, I'm afraid you don't have a say in this matter. The HOA has determined that your property is in violation of community standards, and we're here to ensure compliance. Your violations are meaningless, Elena shot back. I have an injunction requiring you to cease all actions on my property. You're trespassing. Marcus's smile faltered for a moment, but he quickly regained his composure. I don't think you understand how these things work. Injunctions take time to process, and until I see something legally binding, we're proceeding as planned. Elena held up a folder containing a copy of the court order. Then maybe you should read this. Marcus glanced at the folder but didn't take it. Nice try, he said, his voice dripping with condescension. But this doesn't change the fact that your property poses a risk to the community. Risk, Elena countered, her voice rising. The only risk here is the one you've created. You've vandalized my pool, destroyed my fence, and sent your lackeys to intimidate me and my neighbors. I've documented every single violation, and I have enough evidence to bury you in court. For the first time, Marcus's confidence wavered. His eyes darted to the workers behind him, who had paused their preparations, clearly uncertain about continuing under Elena's glare. One of the board members leaned in to whisper something to him, and Marcus's jaw tightened. But before he could respond, the sound of approaching sirens cut through the tension. Elena turned to see 2 police cars pulling up in front of her house. A pair of officers stepped out, their expressions serious as they approached the group. Is there a problem here? One of them asked, his gaze sweeping over the construction equipment and the tense standoff between Elena and Marcus. Yes, Elena said firmly. These people are trespassing on my property and violating a court order. The officer looked to Marcus, who immediately tried to spin the situation. We're acting in accordance with the HOA's bylaws. This property has been deemed non-compliant. The court order trumps your bylaws, the officer interrupted, holding up a hand. If there's a legal dispute, it needs to be resolved in court, not here. For now, I'm going to have to ask you and your crew to leave. Marcus's face turned red with barely contained anger. This is outrageous. Do you have any idea who I am? I know exactly who you are, the officer said coolly, and I suggest you cooperate unless you want this to escalate further. For a moment, it seemed like Marcus might argue, but then he turned on his heel and barked an order to the workers. Pack it up, we're leaving. Elena watched as the crew hastily loaded their equipment back into the trucks. Marcus climbed into his SUV, slamming the door hard enough to make the vehicle rock. As the convoy pulled away, Elena felt a wave of relief wash over her. She had won this battle, but she knew the war wasn't over yet. Later that afternoon, Laura called with more good news. The judge has expedited the hearing for your lawsuit, and the HOA will be required to appear in court the following week. This is your chance to expose everything, Laura said. With the evidence we've gathered, they won't stand a chance. Elena spent the next few days preparing for the hearing, determined to see this through to the end. When the day finally arrived, she walked into the courtroom with her head held high, flanked by Laura and Daniel. Marcus and his legal team were already seated, their expressions grim as they watched her approach. The hearing was intense, with both sides presenting their cases. Laura methodically laid out the evidence, painting a clear picture of Marcus's corruption and the HOA's pattern of harassment. The testimonies from Elena's neighbors only strengthened her case, revealing the extent of Marcus's intimidation tactics. In the end, the judge ruled in Elena's favor, ordering the immediate removal of the fence, the cessation of all HOA actions against her property, and financial compensation for the damages she had endured. Marcus Bennett was referred to state authorities for further investigation into his dealings with Bennett Properties. As Elena walked out of the courthouse, she felt an overwhelming sense of vindication. The fight had been long and arduous, but she had stood her ground and won. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to relax, knowing that her home was truly hers again. The weeks following the court's decision felt like a breath of fresh air for Elena. For the first time since moving into the neighborhood, her home was entirely her own again. The chain-link fence was removed within days, leaving her backyard open and peaceful once more. The pool, once filled with mud and debris, was finally restored to its former pristine condition. Her children, Ava and Noah, wasted no time diving back into the water, their laughter echoing through the yard. Watching them play, Elena felt a deep sense of relief, as though the weight of the entire ordeal had finally been lifted. The fallout for Marcus Bennett was swift and severe. The investigation into his dealings with Bennett Properties uncovered an elaborate scheme to drive down property values through HOA enforcement, allowing him and his associates to purchase homes at a fraction of their worth. The court ordered Marcus to step down as HOA president, and local authorities launched a broader inquiry into his activities, including allegations of fraud and embezzlement. His once commanding presence in the neighborhood was now reduced to whispers of disgrace among the homeowners he had once controlled. With Marcus gone, the HOA was left in disarray. The remaining board members scrambled to distance themselves from his actions, but the damage to their credibility was done. At the next community meeting, Elena attended for the first time not as a target, but as a voice for change. She spoke candidly about her experiences, calling for transparency, fairness, and accountability moving forward. To her surprise, she found herself nominated for a leadership position on the board. Though initially hesitant, she accepted, realizing that the best way to prevent another Marcus was to take an active role in shaping the HOA's future. Her appointment was met with cautious optimism by her neighbors. Those who had once avoided her now approached her with words of support and gratitude. Mrs. Thompson, the elderly woman who had shared the HOA's meeting minutes, thanked her with tears in her eyes, saying, "You stood up for all of us when we were too afraid. You made this a better place." Even Tom, the single father, pitched in to help Elena repair her backyard, replacing the damaged sections of the fence and planting new shrubs around the perimeter. The sense of community that had been fractured under Marcus's rule began to heal, and Elena was heartened to see her neighbors coming together to rebuild what had been lost. But it wasn't just the physical repairs that mattered. For Elena, the victory was about reclaiming her sense of security and autonomy. The fight had tested her limits, pushing her to confront not just external challenges, but also her own doubts and fears. In the end, she had proven to herself and her children that standing up for what was right was always worth it, no matter the odds. One evening, as the sun set behind the tall oak trees lining her yard, Elena hosted a small gathering to celebrate the restoration of the pool. Her neighbors, once distant and wary, now mingled easily, laughing and sharing stories over plates of barbecue and glasses of lemonade. Ava and Noah splashed in the water with the other neighborhood kids, their joy infectious. As Elena stood by the pool, watching the scene unfold, Laura approached her with a knowing smile. "You did it," the lawyer said, raising her glass in a toast. "You turned this place around," Elena smiled back, the weight of the past months finally replaced with quiet pride. "We did it," she corrected. "This wasn't just about me. It was about all of us." The party continued into the evening, the soft glow of string lights casting a warm ambiance over the yard. As Elena looked around at the people who had become her allies and friends, she realized that the home she had fought so hard to protect was no longer just a house. It was a symbol of resilience, a place where her family and her community could truly thrive. For the first time since moving in, Elena felt like she belonged, and as she watched her children laugh and play under the stars, she knew that her fight had been worth every moment. The house and the life she had built within it was finally, undeniably hers.